Hello and welcome to MRAdio, where this week we have slight changes and technical problems. Just a moment. Terry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Brilliant. Okay, so welcome everybody to MRAdio, the weekly show for men's rights and men's issues in the UK. As always, I have my co-host with me, Elizabeth Hobson. Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourself? Terry?
Well, I guess I'll be Elizabeth then.
Yeah. No, so unfortunately tonight Elizabeth can't be with us, but we have a very special guest with us, Terry White, a colleague from the organization Gender Parity UK, and I would say our brain in the organization. Terry, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm a member of Gender Parity UK. I consider myself to be a children's rights activist. The affiliation with Gender Parity came across through my criticisms of the risk of harms report that was done by the Ministry of Justice, and in a very poor way, which is very harmful, I think, to fathers' relationships with their children post-separation.
So can I just ask real quick for our viewers, what is the risk of harms report? So what is the focus? What is the focus, and what is the aim of the report?
The Ministry of Justice commissioned, set up an independent panel to produce a report on assessing risk of harms to children in private law family cases. So they were looking at basically where for want of a better term, child custody matters were before the family court in the United Kingdom. In England and Wales specifically. And the report was exceptionally poorly created, with a heavy degree of bias, essentially on subjective views of disenfranchised mothers who had lost their cases in court. And in particular, they did not consider the outcomes of the children in their assessments. And they had a recommendation in there that the assumption, or rather the presumption, that a child's welfare was benefited by the involvement of the parent should be eliminated from the law. This is now subject at least to...
in other words, that one parent could easily be removed from the child's life.
Yeah, the argument is that the argument is that the domestic abuse was affecting, it was getting in the way of domestic abuse cases, but clearly the legislation did not do that. And in any event, the risk of harms report classified perpetrators of domestic abuse as anyone who had been accused of domestic abuse, whether or not the courts found and completely exonerated them. So the risk of harms report's main finding that in the vast majority of cases, children had been granted direct contact with perpetrators actually meant in the vast majority of cases the court had determined the allegations to be completely unfounded or inconsequential to contact. But it was so geared and biased that it put it in this incredibly misleading way in order to manipulate people into making policy decisions that are essentially harmful to children. And so that's where I became involved with gender parity. It was essentially on a men's issue.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in the last couple of months, I would say this year really, there was a real effort to look into family court reform. This family court reform was encouraged by the Ministry of Justice and the former Minister Dominic Raab. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, what they've found is that basically the family courts are being overwhelmed with volume. because each time that there's a domestic abuse allegation, things get awfully complex and time-consuming. And so the family court was running towards 48 months as an average term for getting rid of for processing cases and things.
And during this time, sorry for interrupting, during this time, in many cases, contact to the children was restricted. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, definitely restricted. And in some cases, children were going without contact for 6-12 months, and perhaps even more, while these complex fact-finding cases were being held. So a big problem arose, I guess, with the decision. And I don't want to do Friday night football too much, but a decision of the High Court following the risk of harms report, which basically said that coercive control should be considered, in a complete narrative arc, and any allegations of domestic abuse should be considered, which caused, of course, an immediate surge in court time to process essentially irrelevant and inconsequential matters. And so the court then in K&K ruled that, or toned that down a bit, washed that down a bit, so that re-emphasised the need to ensure that whatever the court was hearing was relevant to the children's interests, the children's welfare interests. So a surge and then a row back, and now the family court itself, the judiciary, and the Ministry of Justice are looking at ways to reduce the total court time, reduce the total court costs, and try and bring resolutions much faster.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting. And I think, especially from the side of fathers' rights, there's definitely, we agree that there's an absolute need for a family court reform. And I think everybody agrees with that. Unfortunately, and I know that you've been working for, I would say, a year now on creating a document that with proposals for how a family court reform could look like. Unfortunately, the other side, so I would say women's organizations or feminist organizations, they have also put a lot of effort into pushing for even more bias against fathers in the family court, unfortunately also spearheaded by very public and respected figures like the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. So I was aware of that. Is that correct, Terry?
Yeah, that's fairly correct. I think that this has been a process that has been in the minds of these feminist organisations for some time preceding the risk of harms report, but certainly if one were to plan out a pathway to exclude and eliminate fathers, that pathway would have included the risk of harms report and then followed by the actions of the UN Special Rapporteur, and then the actions of the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. And it is noteworthy that a lot of the same players are all involved with each other in this train.
So this is not just restricted to the UK. This goes further. You just mentioned the UN Special Rapporteur, and that ties into another topic that we mentioned before in this show, the topic of parental alienation. And so is it correct to say that a couple of years ago the law had changed that I'm just going to say mothers, but obviously that is theoretically also open to fathers, they just don't use it. If you make a claim of domestic abuse in custody cases or in divorce cases, then you get free legal advice. Is that correct?
That's right. So this was rather. It used to be the case that you'd get means tested, but free legal aid for both sides in family court. And of course, this was getting very expensive. And so there was a reform in about 2013, I think it came into play, called LAPSO. And that eliminated legal aid availability except for people who claim to be victims of domestic abuse.
And in the following year, the claims of domestic abuse surged, and it was 4 times the amount. Is that correct? Roughly 4 times?
Over the 10 years, it's good. It's tripled the claims of domestic. The police reports of domestic abuse has tripled, and the police reports of rape have quadrupled. How much of that is attached to the LAPSO, we don't know for sure, but it seems consistent.
But the government does research every year or every couple of years. So the ONS statistics, and they ask if people have experience with domestic abuse, and the numbers in this research did not go up, while the claims of domestic abuse did dramatically go up in divorce cases. Is that correct? So
not specifically in divorce cases, but in overall domestic violence, as we understand the term in the UK, which excludes non-violent abuse, halved over that 10-year period in which the police reports tripled.
In the ONS statistics. So in the research, ONS statistics, it went down, but in the police reports, it went up. Is that correct?
That's right. So the police reports are always far behind, or always, significantly behind the prevalence rates, because a lot of people never report.
Of course.
So there was an argument. There has been an argument that all the police reports are doing is catching up to the prevalence rates, but it appears that is not entirely correct, because the propensity to report, where that has also been recorded, hasn't changed. So it looks like the prevalence is decreasing. The number of real police reports should be consistent, and yet the number of police reports has dramatically increased. And this has led in now to the family courts, where we're seeing about 70% or perhaps it's higher than that now, of family court applications now involve allegations of domestic abuse.
Now, is it, to my knowledge, it is fair to say that mothers are often advised to make claims of domestic abuse, both by lawyers and by women's organizations, and actually asking leading questions like, have you ever been insulted? Did he call you a stupid cow or something like that? Things that obviously gonna happen if you have a divorce. There will be some tension, which to my knowledge is often be misconstrued as abusive behavior. Am I completely wrong to say that?
Well, you're not completely wrong, but you're working in an area that there's no data. We're just running on inference, and we do know from sporadic anecdotal reports that individuals are being asked very leading questions when they go to Women's Aid or Refuge. Obviously, I think by people who are genuinely trying to help in that case, just who see this person who needs an accommodation, they want to provide accommodation, and they sort of like try and help them tick the boxes to get them the accommodation. But in terms of what the solicitors are doing, it's impossible to say because it's all under privilege.
Yeah.
It certainly feels like, from my own experience of family court, that there does almost seem to be a playbook behind this, where people make exaggerated claims that are not consequential to the issues at hand necessarily, and receive legal aid and a significant boost to their prospects of winning.
From there we move on, because if these claims are made, as we mentioned previous, contact with the children is restricted, or can be, or is restricted with the father, and which at times is also used by the mother, who is maybe at times bitter about the breakup, or bitter or hostile towards the father.
Or the objective of making one of these mendacious allegations would be to sever the relationship between the accused and their child, and as such, it's an act itself of coercive control. It's getting
which is commonly known as parental alienation.
Parental alienation, but the parental alienation doesn't necessarily need an allegation of domestic abuse. It can be done much more subtly. But
it is currently the people like the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and the UN Special Rapporteur, they claim that parental alienation is usually or almost exclusively used by abusive fathers to make counter allegations, and they tried to dismiss the claim of parental alienation as actually a form of abuse, not an accusation of abuse. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but essentially they're trying to. There seems to be a concerted effort to get parental alienation removed from the scope of family court, which of course is incredibly dangerous. The argument being that it is being used as a counter to an allegation of domestic abuse, which I'm sure in many cases it is. And I'm sure in many cases that there's actual parental alienation that's being, there'll be false allegations of parental alienation. There'll be false allegations of domestic abuse to create parental alienation. So it really is for the courts to decide. And as complex as it may be, it is not something that can really be dealt with at a policy level. You need someone to look at the case by case basis. To examine the facts and make a determination.
But it is fair to say that it is dangerous to dismiss the reality of parental alienation, because everybody knows that it exists. I think everybody knows a case in their life where at least alienating behaviors have been used by partners. Maybe it's not like a excessive case of parental alienation, but I would say there is almost no case of separation where parents do not badmouth the other parent in one case or the other. It is just so incredibly common. Everybody knows it exists. Now, there's obviously a difference between normal human behaviors, let's say, and an effort to really cut ties between the child and the father.
Well, the thing is that there's
or mother for that case.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is such a thing as normal human behavior in a separation. It is quite unusual as a phenomenon, and very recent as a phenomenon, that the parents would split without one of them being dead or seriously injured or doing something terrible and being arrested or something. There wouldn't be the very idea of divorce when children are young is rare throughout history.
Yeah.
And it's only really becoming quite commonplace now. So I don't know if there is such a thing as a normal human behavior. The problem is we don't have, as a society, we haven't developed the protocols around that. How are you supposed to behave in separation when you're in these ongoing relationships with someone who's perfectly capable of looking after a child, who is responsible for it, who makes those decisions? There's something I imagine that there's something intrinsically threatening to a mother about having a father have an involved interest in their child after separation, and I think that comes out it comes out one way or another with children. I've spoken to people who have had perfectly amicable children, grown-up children of perfectly amicable divorces, but they still say they felt like siding with one parent or another, usually the mother. Sure. Not because necessarily of anything the parents did, but just because, what's a child going to do in those situations? A child needs to, have a protected and safe environment, and unless the parents are enlightened about the risk of alienation, they're going to do things which are going to exacerbate that issue and that stress for the children. It's a very difficult situation. There's a lot of inadvertent alienation, and I find
but it is clear that by the government or the family courts devaluing one parent over the other and siding usually with the mother and saying the mother is per default the important parent and the father is the less important parent. I think it is clear from research from other countries that does not lead to a positive outcome. Most research shows that the presumption of 50-50 shared parenting has the best outcome and leads to the least adversarial separations. Is that correct?
Yeah, they are certainly as close as they can get to 50-50. The closer you get to 50-50, the better the outcomes for the children, generally speaking, in terms of a large data set. And so, again, we're not very well set up for that in the UK, at least, with an ongoing presumption that one parent has to be in a primary position, if not primary care. We're sort of migrating very slowly towards the idea that yes, we should have both parents being equal. Yeah. But it's taking a long time for us to actually put that into place in terms of parenting time. There's a lot of resistance to it, to equal parenting time. And again, this is not a natural situation that people that our societies are built to manage. If you have a look at other societies that have had a no-fault divorce for a long time, and this is I'm primarily thinking of Islamic societies under Sharia law. Their system was to have the child reside with one parent only, the mother until age 7, and the father after that. So it's almost 50-50 time split in blocks of life rather than week to week. And
that's fascinating.
Is that a better situation? I don't know, but it worked. It was developed over centuries of practice. So maybe it does work. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, see, as men's rights activists, we don't often hear good news, or our work often feels fruitless. You had a little bit, I would say we had a tiny bit of a success recently. You mentioned the UN Special Rapporteur, and she created a report, and this report with false claims, I would say, or with very, very biased claims, tried to push the narrative that parental alienation doesn't exist and that it is used by fathers against mothers, and you opposed that with you contacted everybody who was working in that field. You guys started a petition. Could you please share with us what you did and what the current outcome is? Because there was a little bit of a silver lining.
Yeah, all credit to Jan James at
Parent Safety.
Yeah, and Davia for their excellent work on it, and especially the PASG, the Parent Alienation Support Group, and Gary Parr, their Mexican counterpart, or I should say Mexico-based counterpart, for putting together in quick order a critique, which is online, of the Special Rapporteur's report, and then we fashioned a complaint letter around that and submitted that to the UN HRC Council members. But in essence, in a nutshell, the UN. Are you getting an echo? I'm getting an echo.
No, I'm
Okay.
good. Could our viewer please tell us if there's an echo, or if the sound is okay? That would be very helpful. Please continue, Terry.
Yeah, the UNSR VAW's report was again focused on this dichotomy between domestic abuse and parental alienation claims, with the emphasis that parental alienation claims were the result of were made to stop domestic abuse claims. There's very little evidence to support what she was claiming. The way she set up the survey, or rather the call for inputs, was extremely biased and presumed her assertions rather than investigate her assertions. And of course, in this field, if you're asking, the risk of harms report did the same thing, where they just had this open invitation for inputs. And the problem that they have is that people who have been through the court have had their claims dismissed, their claims of domestic abuse dismissed, and then found that they have been alienating the child against the parent. Well, the court's already found that they've lied, and so if we take their story, their anecdotes, and we rely on it, it's not good information by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there's of course problems with using qualitative data anyway, but in terms of a data set for qualitative information, it's less reliable than a random person on the street, and probably less reliable than a litigant pre-trial. The thing is that
is it fair to say that bad data and biased data has seldomly stopped policymakers from following them down a rabbit hole?
Okay, well, it would appear by the consistency of the strategy across the risk of harms report and the UNSRVAW's system that perhaps it wasn't a skills gap. And when I say that,
what do you mean by a skills gap?
I mean it wasn't someone who didn't know how to do research. It was a deliberate attempt to fudge, to create data, or to create a research output document that would support a preconceived narrative. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is, or say that I suspect that, is that the conduct of the final report was to suppress the submissions that she actually received. In her call for input, she said that she would be publishing all of the submissions that she received, and she refused to do that. There's no mention in there of any of the very good submissions that we saw going in from a number of parties. And
sorry, may I say, because earlier I would say I represented something. There are huge numbers of mothers that experience parental alienation as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So because early on I insinuated that it's exclusively or almost exclusively fathers that are victims, or where their children are victim of parental alienation, but no, it's mothers as well, which makes it so insidious, because these women's organizations throw mothers under the bus, simply so mothers that experience parental alienation are being thrown under the bus simply because these organizations don't want fathers that experience parental alienation to be taken seriously.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of our complaint items about the Special Rapporteur's conduct was that she led these women to, put their hearts out and to tell them their experiences, and then her final report just completely suppressed them and negated their experiences. And that really is a secondary victimization of these women. That was really nasty behavior by Reem Al-Salam, and I think these women deserve an apology for that. Now, this was the Special Rapporteur against violence against women and girls, and who was actually committing violence against women and girls in the
Exactly. Just wanted to say, because you just focused on what was done to women. Now, the reason why you highlighted the women is because her job is to focus on violence against women and girls.
That's right.
And she can't even do that.
Well, it's not that she can't do it, it's that she would appear
ignores,
that she was pretty, at the very most generous, you can say she was reckless.
Yes.
About the harm that she was causing to these women victims of domestic abuse, and that's just
and since she received the letters, you cannot say that she didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
anyway, I wanted to.
So you complained about it, and there was a petition. How many signatures did you get?
We got 5,000
which is
signatures.
Good.
For a niche issue in that time, I'd say it's a very good result. But it was from all over the world. We had people from Austria and South America, and and Japan and India. India seems to be a problem.
Massive.
And South Africa, and it's just and men and women both about.
I think we have to say huge kudos to Davia, who managed to get organizations from all around the world to become members of Davia, women's or men's organizations, children's organizations, all supporting equality and protection for all victims.
And so it, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about what the Special Rapporteur actually did, because one of the things I found most egregious was her paragraph 62 of her report, where she just smeared the psychologists who had reported it. She said, that she effectively insinuated that they were just doing it for money, and and were unreliable, and that the journals that published them wouldn't refuse to publish the rebuttals from her side of the argument, whereas obviously these are scientific journals and they just didn't come up to the standards required for them. She made these comments after having a private meeting with experts, which that it's not part of the submissions. It's not auditable at all. We don't know who these people are, although we can suspect who they are.
I think we have a pretty clear idea who they were.
And it's just appalling, unprofessional behaviour. That really, this comes at the time when the UN Human Rights Council is saying, we need greater control over misinformation, and here they have their own special rapporteur putting in what could only be reasonably described as an effort to disseminate misinformation in order to manipulate a resolution, which would be harmful to victims of domestic abuse and children. So and harmful to their human rights. It's an astonishing affair that really does need to be properly investigated. It really is. It's quite shocking stuff.
Yeah, I would say maybe to a lesser maybe to a lesser degree, I would say the same as can be said about the domestic abuse commissioner, the victims commissioners. It seems like these people who have a very clear bias and are therefore not doing their job at all, it seems like there is no way to hold them accountable and say, you are not doing your job. You're ignoring 50% or 30% of the victims that you should advocate for. And from my point of view, as like from Gender Parity UK, it is very frustrating that there are actually no easy pathways to hold these people accountable.
There doesn't seem to be any pathways. The risk of harms report was structured so that it would not be susceptible to the Civil Service Code of Conduct or the Magenta Book or in any professional standards. So straight away there was just nothing to say, look, you haven't done your job, because they don't actually have these professional standards to apply to, let alone any oversight mechanism. The special rapporteur is supposed to be held accountable to the Code of Conduct for special rapporteurs. It was adopted by the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations back in 2007. But a complaint, 5,000 signatures to a complaint, 5,000 signatures from all over the world, and they haven't even acknowledged it. And not formally anyway. The UN entity itself hasn't acknowledged it. I think we got some sway with the council members themselves at an individual level, the country representatives, but the UN institution.
So what happened there?
Well, we emailed them the complaint and then a few follow-on documents. And the reason why I think that we had some sway was because of the word salad that the special rapporteur gave at the end, where she said let me see if I can pull it up and read it to you, because it's quite amusing.
I'm just gonna leave the camera, please, and entertain our audience for a moment. Maybe tell a joke. I'll be back in 10 seconds.
Hang on. Okay. Now, all right. So she goes, I understand very much that mothers and fathers feel, therefore, that because they go through this reality, parental alienation is not a pseudo concept and that it is very real. We cannot put this reality under the label of parental alienation because that reality is part of a continuum of coercive control that is being levied within a particular context from one partner to another. We have to find a different name other than the label of parental alienation to describe this kind of post-separation abuse. So basically, yeah, it's happening, but we need a different name because it's coercive control. Well, it's insane that this is still being passed around. And then the domestic abuse.
Unfortunately, I'm quite used to this nonsense gobbledygook. It seems to be so common nowadays that people in quite important positions can just get away with saying absolute nonsense. Yeah. But you think she didn't get away because there was quite a backlash to this comment, wasn't there?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. But certainly there was a lot of comments on it from my circle. It was just unbelievable, nonsense word salad that basically said, okay, well, it's a reality. But what can you do? This should never have gone to the United Nations Human Rights Council. It should never have been submitted in this report. Certainly, there was nothing in the report that she submitted that said, "Oh, well, it's a reality and we just need a name change." Her recommendation was to exclude parental alienation from the consideration of family courts. That was her recommendation. to cut it out. Now that she says that it's coercive control, effectively what her recommendation was that family court should allow coercive control.
Wow.
Wasn't it? So
yeah.
that was her actual position.
In the last couple of days, so I responded to something that she wrote on Twitter, and she actually replied to me, and I was quite surprised that she did reply. And after that, she blocked everybody. And
yes.
I feel like she really got rattled. It seems like whatever happened behind closed doors, your efforts, everybody's efforts, she felt the attacks. And I think her position is not as stable as it was before. At least that's what it felt like to me in regards to her actions, her responses.
Well, this is what I find frustrating about it, because I know that she has solid views on the transgender issues and how they affect children. And that's something that concerns me as well. And we've lost a potentially good advocate. You know, she's destroyed her own credibility for nothing. And on this rather important issue, where she really should be concentrating her firepower to protect women and girls from this ideology which seeks to cause them harm. She's lost her credibility. It makes it much more harder and much more difficult to get that real important stuff done.
Well, I think both of us, you and me, we agree with, for example, J.K. Rowling on her stance on the transgender issue.
Well, certainly with children.
With children. But J.K. Rowling says the transgender movement is part of the men's rights movement, which obviously is such absolute nonsense. I don't know a single person from the men's rights movement who is on board with the transgender agenda. So just because somebody believes in biological reality or has a, let's say, a correct view on the transgender issue, doesn't mean that they're not man-hating bigots, unfortunately.
The unfortunate thing they get stuck on is the special rapporteur and Shearer family law and others, they want to make subjective reality the reality. They want accusations of domestic abuse to be treated as if they're true, regardless. So they want the subjective reality, and that puts them at a very difficult position to argue against transgender ideology. It says, okay, well, my subjective reality is that I'm a woman, so what are you going to do about that? Or my subjective reality for a young girl is that I'm a boy, so therefore, put me on chemicals.
I would say that their worldview is essentially it's consistent, because it's essentially based on absolute distrust towards any male. So their objection to the transgender issue is hatred against males. They have no problem with transgender men, women that identify or present as men. They don't have a problem with them at all, because they view them as because they are females, they view them as women.
I don't know enough about her position. Whether she recognizes the risk to girls of chemical interference with their puberty. I don't know.
I don't know her personal views, and I know that there are plenty of women, including like feminist lesbians, that are very concerned about the effect on young girls, because many of them might be lesbians, obviously, or tomboys. But unfortunately, from what we see, we see that from the report of the special rapporteur, they don't have a problem throwing women and girls under the bus if it furthers their agenda.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So I unfortunately I cannot give them the benefit of the doubt in any way. Does that mean that I disagree with them on the transgender issue just out of spite? No, of course not. But they're not an ally. We fight in the same direction, but I do not fight side by side by these people, because I know that after this war is won, they will stab us in the back immediately, because they already do it. That
goes with the territory. But I guess my point was that I did say a useful ally, but at least a useful a person to have influence and a voice at the UN to advocate to protect young girls and protect women generally. It's undermined.
Has potentially lost her credibility.
Exactly. She's lost the credibility, and they can't simultaneously argue that subjective reality is the only thing that we need to care about, and then argue against transgenderism. It's just they don't have the logical consistency to run this case.
I have never seen any of these ideologues being held accountable. I've never seen their narrative being questioned. So to be honest, I wouldn't worry about that, because even though her report was dismantled, and even though there are inconsistencies of her thinking, I don't think that anybody in the UN really cares, from my experience, because they don't apply rationale as a standard, I would say.
Yeah, I mean,
otherwise they would have dismissed the report themselves without anybody criticizing it, because it was obviously biased.
I don't know about the process that whether they can actually do that off their own bat, but I think it's important to distinguish between the delegates to the UN from the countries and the UN as a separate institution. The UN and then we have that around them. We have the special rapporteurs as well. But the UN as an institution, I think, is very anemic to acting in a way that might be perceived as not left. Not necessarily right wing, but just not fully supporting the left wing, the current thing. That's the better way of putting it, because I don't think it is a left or right wing thing necessarily, at least not in the traditional term. It is more of this cultural zeitgeist of believe all women, me too kind of thing, and then that also leaks into transgenderism and everything. I mean, UN Women is sitting there trying to push for the transgenderism thing at the same time as trying to represent women, and it's
but I've got the feeling, to be honest, I've got the feeling that UN Women really is just a Twitter account, probably just one person tweeting out things, and nobody likes it. Like women don't like it because they throw women under the bus with the trans ideology. Men don't like it because they're man-hating. So I feel like I feel like they are widely considered as a joke, but they exist. That's the thing. And within the UN, they still have a voice, which is terrifying. Now, the report of the special rapporteur was dismissed, which is
I think the appropriate way to say it is that the Human Rights Committee was dissuaded from passing any of the recommended resolutions.
Okay. So that is
for the time being.
Small. Yeah. So that is a small win,
Hmm.
but the next battle, the battle continues, because 2 days ago the Domestic Abuse Commissioner released her report on family court reform, and this report was created again through an incredibly biased process where I think, apart from one, no men's pro-male organizations were invited at all.
This is to the roundtables, yeah?
Yes, that was the roundtables.
And the roundtables was preceded by a survey which is roundly mocked as for its extreme bias. And there is a complaint to the Domestic Abuse Commissioner outstanding about the undertaking of that survey, which she says she can't answer because it's going to be put forward to Parliament. And presumably now we can get an answer that she's issued this report based on it, but we'll see.
Unfortunately, it really feels like a battle, David versus Goliath.
I don't even know where to start holding the commissioners responsible for their conduct. I mean, it takes a parliamentary will, and I don't think we've got that with the Conservative Party at the moment. With notable exceptions, it seems to be steering. It seems that they're falling harder and harder onto these soft issues now, and hopefully we'll see some action in the final moments of their current administration. And I certainly hope they'll win, because Labour seems to be even worse.
Do you think since I've been a men's rights activist, I've seen it getting worse. Now I think the culture is actually changing, and I think that more people wake up to the fact that men are being discriminated against, but we do not see that reflected in politics at all. I would say the opposite, and this Tory government has pushed through a lot of virtue signaling in favor of women and women's organizations. Do you think that it can get so bad that it breaks and that there are positive changes?
What, on men's issues?
Yes, especially family court, and I would say issues around the welfare of children and the protection of marriage.
I think that there is far more, to my mind, there's far more scope for the welfare interests of boys, boy children, in terms of education, and child-friendly outcomes from family court reform. There is some echoes about Minister for Men at the moment. I think you mentioned that there was an article.
I'm gonna just in the last moments, I'm gonna just put that up, but Elizabeth and we're gonna talk about that in next week's episode.
Okay. Yeah.
Just let me put that up on screen. Yeah, please continue.
There's push for a Minister for Men, and I do hope that is successful, just from a balance point of view.
Yeah.
And
so just to let everybody know, we Elizabeth and we will talk about this article in next week's episode. I'm just going to read out the headline: Former Minister for Women calls for a Minister for Men. And that has been the second time this week that Minister for Men was was mentioned. So maybe there's some movement.
Yeah, there's some murmurings at least, and I think that there is some, as the Tory government seeks to maintain influence in Middle Britain, it'll push in that direction. But in terms of the institutional blob and its infatuation with the feminist movement at the moment, I worry that it is coming to an impasse, coming into a point where it goes one way or the other. Either the feminist narrative will completely destroy or completely crush the focus on the children's welfare as a primary outcome for the court, or the children's welfare for the primary outcome of the court will finally be heard against these the feminist voices who are seeking to exploit the children in order to further their own agendas.
I would say I'm rationally black-pilled. I have a white pill in my heart due to my faith, but I would say I'm rationally black-pilled when I look at stories, for example, like that the woman that killed her unborn Bible child was released from prison. I'm quite black-pilled. I think that our society is currently incapable of holding women to account for anything. And I think we're moving more and more towards excusing any action of any woman, including murder of their husbands, murders of anybody. And we will excuse everything with mental health problems. And any action by a man will be judged harder and harder. So I'm quite black-pilled in that regard. And I think it's going to get worse. My question is, will there come a point when it breaks? Because it's just not.
Well, it almost has to, only because the people who are having children are not the people making these rules. Those types of political agitators tend not to have children, and people who
they tend to educate
views,
but they tend to educate our children.
Sorry?
But they tend to educate our children.
Yeah, they're still there in that sense, but it can only ever be a temporary effect. Yeah, in the long run, in the super long run. It's probably going to get better after you're dead, Philip.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It might be after we die that it gets better, but it's inevitable that it will. That aspect will get better. The question is how much damage is done to the social infrastructure in the meantime.
Yeah.
But we all we can do is fight our fights, and try and make a case for rationality above everything else, and trying to help people wherever we can to at least have a voice. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for being joining us this week for MRAdio. And everyone to share the video on Twitter, because I'm currently banned for a week.
Okay.
I said something naughty. So please share the video and join us again next week, next Thursday. And I usually end MRAdio with a prayer. Terry, you can join in or not. That's up to you. And obviously the same goes for all of our viewers. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the positive progress that we make, for the energy that you're giving us, for the inspiration to fight for justice, to fight for a society that is more loving, that cares about children, that cares about families, And in the end, we need your guidance. We need your inspiration, your spirit to guide us on the right path. We ask you to support all those who fight for what's right and good, and we pray for those who oppose us, that their hearts might be softened and that their eyes might be opened to what is good and right. It is in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Terry.
I'll see you later then, Philip.
Take care, and see you next week in Gender Parity UK.
Okay, see you, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.